This is Reworking Work, a video series from Quartz where we go deep with senior executives on the inner workings of their companies. All right, hello everybody, and welcome to Reworking Work. I'm so excited to have our guest here. We go back a little bit. It's Eimear Marrinan. Eimear, thanks for coming.
Oh my God, pleasure. Pleasure. I never miss an opportunity, Anna, to get to speak to you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Can you do a quick introduction for people who don't know you as well?
Of course, absolutely. So my name is Eimear Marrinan. I am Vice President of Culture and ESG at HubSpot. And so the Culture and ESG team, just so everybody knows, is responsible for building a sustainable, equitable and high performance culture, one where everyone feels like they belong. And my proudest achievement, I have to say, is that I'm also a mom of 3 girls. So I always want to get that in there.
Oh, yes. And gosh, the last time we talked, I think your littlest was how old?
I know. I think she was like a brand new one. She's 19 months now, so not so brand new, but I still feel like she is.
Oh, I love it. Soak it up. Soak it up. Okay. So we're going to dive in and talk about HubSpot a little bit today, and hopefully share something that people can borrow from, right? That's our goal with this. We want to rework work and we want to look at things in a new way. So I'm excited to pull back the curtain on one of the programs that you have. And Eimear, it's really important for me, especially I got so excited when I heard that it was data driven, right? I mean, you leveraged a lot of internal data on what your employees were looking for around connection. So let's start there. What did you find when you looked at that?
Yeah, completely. So just for context, we run internal engagement surveys or ENPS surveys once a quarter. And so we ask people how they're feeling. Are they feeling engaged? And at times we actually tailor these surveys to ask kind of questions or gather feedback top of mind. And so recently we dug a little bit deeper into hybrid and on the work that we've been doing in particular on building a hybrid culture just to test ourselves, see how we were doing. And the data really revealed that we have a gap specifically in the area of connection. But what was interesting is our employees internally feel connected to the culture, they feel connected to their mission and to their internal team. But 35% of them said that they don't have an opportunity to connect with others outside of their direct team and across the organization. And then on top of that, what we also heard were people were really looking for deeper relationships. So not those like surface levels, hey, how are you? What team are you in? How's your job going? They actually were looking for, I would say, friendships. And so we really are leaning into that data to tailor the approach. That's really important to make sure, obviously, that we're solving for the right thing.
Yeah. And I think that's so valid because look, I've said this before, it's a lot easier to manage all remote or all in person. Hybrid, operationally, it just takes so much more finesse. And that's really why we've got to leverage this, quantitative data and qualitative data when we can. So in response then, Eimear, to those learnings, you created this Connect 4 program. Tell us the origin story of that.
We created Connect 4, exactly. So like I said, when we kind of got this feedback back, we saw that over 1/3 of our employees really felt disconnected from others across the organization and outside of their teams. And I did want to say, by the way, that that is not unique to HubSpot. So we published our hybrid work report recently, where we spoke to a ton of external companies and employees, and over 60% of employees feel less connected to their coworkers, which I think is not surprising, right? But again, something that we had to act to. On top of that, we also learned that people with lower levels of connection have also a stronger intention to quit and a higher chance of job seeking. And so, like, no brainer, we have to solve for this. We have to get this right. And so hence was born Connect 4. So Connect 4 really is our strategy to build remarkable hybrid connection across HubSpot. And it focuses on 4 key areas. And in terms of where the name comes from, we believe by connecting all of those 4 together, we're going to win. And we're going to create a thriving hybrid culture. And so what those 4 key areas are is purpose, equity, ease, and sustainability.
Oh, I love those. I love those. So before we dive into those, I'm always curious because we made it sound really easy. In 2 minutes, we just talked about finding out data and then starting this program. But I know that there was a lot more work that went into that. And so what were some of the challenges you faced on gaining buy-in or really just instituting this? Or were there?
It's a great question. Honestly, I think the first thing was focusing everybody on the right thing, which is why data was really, really important, because I think, we transitioned to a hybrid model in 2020 from a HubSpot perspective. And I would say operationally, that's working. Like, we understand what a work preference is. We know how people will self-select and change their work preference. It's embedded into our processes. But the journey that we're still on is, what does that look like from a cultural perspective? Like, how do we truly create a remarkable hybrid culture? And that means so much, and we can go in so many different directions. And so the biggest challenge, I think, was actually figuring out like what was our genuine pain point and what is going to solve for employees, like almost what's our biggest bang for buck. And so the data was really, really important, again, to make sure that we were telling the right story and we were able to influence people in the right way. And I think once we had that, honestly, buy-in wasn't hard. Like, luckily, HubSpot cares really deeply about their employees and they want to get this right. And leadership really wants to get this right. And I think the other thing that helped us is connection is top of mind in general for HubSpot, both obviously from an employee perspective, but also externally. Like Yamini, our CEO, speaks a lot about disconnected customers. It was her keynote at Inbound last year. And so it kind of tied together. We need to solve the connection, both for our customers, but then also for our employees. But making sure we were focused and focusing on the right thing, I would say that was probably our biggest challenge.
Okay, so good. So focus is helpful. Let's talk about the 4 pillars, right? The 4 areas of connect. So purpose, I love that that's in there. I think if we don't have strong purpose, that North Star, it's not going to help. But what does purpose look like when you focus through Connect 4?
Yeah, completely. So when we think about purpose, it's all about being intentional and actually purposeful about connecting employees outside of their teams. And so it's about creating the space and time for this to happen. What we found was people were just craving connection. So for example, you'd find that people that lived close to an office, but maybe were remote, would go into an office on any given day to meet people and see people. And nobody might have been there on that day. Again, we completely encourage that. But we had to be really intentional about what are the moments that we actually want to bring people together, either in person in office, in person remote, or virtually. So giving everybody that option.
Okay, so good options are great, right? And trying to bring them together to tie it all together.
Yeah, totally. And then as you think about ease, so ease again is all around how we can make connection easy for people. Like, we need to take the friction out of connection, especially for our managers. And so, like I said, really leaning into technology and making it easier for folk to connect, definitely regardless of location. And providing, I would say, better enablement material for managers. I think that's something that we underestimated, that you have to work at this and we have to train our managers as well, and what that looks like. So that's a core foundation for ease.
Good. Let's talk about that, because leaders play a special role. And we really talk to 3 audiences as much as we can at Quartz at Work, Eimear. We talk to the systems and the decision makers themselves, the leaders, and then the individuals. So this is for anybody, either they want to be a leader or they are a leader, a people leader. How did you equip those people leaders? Because it's such a critical role. If they aren't involved, right, it's going to break down really quickly.
Yeah. I completely agree. So as we think about like that pillar in particular, there's a number of things that we're going to be doing. So really, like I said, providing better enablement materials for our managers, like in terms of this is what the theory says, but then how do you actually go and implement this? What does this look like in your team? And speaking to different people, like learning in terms of practically what does that look like? So that was core. But then also like holding leaders accountable. Like, this is a framework and we're doing a ton of stuff from a culture perspective, but we expect leaders to drive this across their own teams and to hold their teams accountable, and build connection themselves within their team. But that, I do think they need the help and kind of training to do that for sure.
Oh, they've got to have tools. I mean, we don't send people. I mean, I'm not a big war analogy person, but if we were going to fight a big fight, everybody would need to be equipped with the right tools. We'd need a plan. We'd need a roadmap. Otherwise, it would just be complete chaos. And I don't think we equate that enough to the world of work.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's hard. And I do think it's one of the things that we underestimate at times. Like, this is a shift for people, especially for our new managers. And so again, it's not enough to just hand somebody a book and say, hey, read this now, do it. It's about writing the theory, but then actually how do you embed that into an organization? And that's a mix of, again, like I said, trainings, which are self-paced, like having that toolkit there, but then also learning from others in terms of what they're doing and kind of bringing in different speakers and helping coach our managers in the right way.
And how about equity then?
Yeah, so 60% of our workforce are at-home workers. And so we really need to make sure that we're equitable in our approach. So everybody has the opportunity to connect. Again, regardless of where you are. In a way, I think that when you're in an office and you're with other people, like, that's easy at times to connect. When you are virtual and remote, and you are not near anybody, that is really, really hard. And so over indexing on that and making sure that, like I said, we're being completely active in our approach, and you have opportunities to come together regardless of where you are.
Oh, perfect. And then how about sustainability, your last pillar?
Yeah, so a core goal at HubSpot is we want to be net carbon zero by 2040. And so it's interesting, I think sometimes when you think about connection, our employees equated that with how and when can we travel, and when can we start traveling now, and how often can we travel? And really for us, we want to maximize connection while minimizing our carbon footprint. That is super important. And so we had to establish guardrails for people as we think about, again, meeting up in person and distinguish that. So, meeting up and the kind of the investment and the return on investment is different for leaders than it is individual contributors. And so being really, really thoughtful around that and making sure that we had those guardrails in place as we thought about connection.
And, I already shouted out how hard hybrid is to manage logistically. So let's give a little example, maybe on each end of the spectrum, Eimear, where we're giving, like, what's a small everyday thing that you're doing to nurture connection with your HubSpotters?
Yeah, totally. So I can call out maybe one from each pillar to kind of help it bring it to life. So from a purpose perspective, something that we're doing is creating a connection day. And so once a week, we host a connection day in each office. So this is an optional day for people to come together and connect if you want to. Again, it's completely optional. So majority of the locations is a Thursday. So if you want to see people and meet people, if you want to host your team together in person, do that on a Thursday. It's going to be mass majority of folk will be there. And similarly, if you want to host a remote meetup, do it on a Thursday. So it's almost like, again, it's that purpose and intention behind calling out a day. As we think then about ease, something that we're doing is leaning into technology to sing again, how can we really create equitable ways and easy ways for folk to connect? And so we've created something called MixHub. It's a Slack mixer tool, which again connects folk in a virtual setting and facilitates those personalized ad hoc coffee chats. And again, one step beyond, hey, what's your name? What department are you in? But really providing like fun, quirky prompts so you actually get to know people and have that kind of deep connection that we know people want. As we think about equity, then we're investing in remote meetups at scale. So really making sure that we have opportunity for our at-home folk to meet in person. We will be formalizing something called a remote champion. So again, how do you have like remote culture champions that can help facilitate connection? So it's almost a train the trainer situation, and it's scalable. So it doesn't always have to be our team that's doing that. And there's also ways then when you don't have an office presence to actually bring people together. And then finally, like I said, sustainability is being super intentional around travel, and when we recommend folk to travel and when we don't.
Oh, I love that you're thinking about that, because I've talked to a lot of companies lately who are trying to be intentional about their gathering, but it's extra hard to be intentional about your gathering with that goal in mind. So good for you. I wanted to ask real quick, Eimear, because you mentioned those remote champions and that my ears picked up. Are those people who are filling other roles within the organization, and that's kind of an add-on that they say, I want to be this champion?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So right now what we're doing is, again, using data to think about like what are the 10 locations where we want to sponsor our remote meetup across the globe. And that's based on like, where we have a high proportion of employees without an office. We may have like a couple of leaders in place. There's high engagement, say on Slack, like we know there's a want for connection. So we reach out and we see who's active and who really is great and wants to build community. And they act as our remote hosts, knowing that we can't be there on the ground. And they're almost our culture carriers and our remote champions. And so we want to formalize that. It's not done yet. It will be a work in progress. And give people the opportunity to act in that way. But it's definitely on top of their day job. And so it's something that we also need to be incredibly mindful of and put some like clear guidelines in place around what that is and what that isn't.
And I think, we need to call out that we've certainly been talking about this from a systems perspective, and HubSpot is a great place to work in many respects, right? Both for lists and but based on their employee feedback. So y'all are doing a lot in this area, which I really appreciate. We talked a little bit about leaders, but I want to talk to those people out there, Eimear, who are like, my company is not doing any of this. I'm hybrid. What can the individual do to take responsibility to create connection for themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, ultimately, it is up to the individual to participate in this. We can, like I said, we can set out the plan, we can set out the strategy, but people have to take part, and people can drive connection in their own day. And I know, that's hard for many. It's like, how do you reach out and make those connection and kind of make an effort? But you do have to make, I think, an intentional effort. But I think something that we're trying to do is make that easy for people. But I would definitely recommend that, like, take the leap, get involved, and really think about what does connection mean for you and your organization, and how can you actually drive change there personally.
Yeah. What about you, Eimear, personally, in your day-to-day? What's a tip that you have or that you use just based on your own energy? Because I think each of us are different, but what's a strategy that you use to build connection?
Good question. I always want to spend time getting to know somebody. Like, I think that's a bit of a superpower. Like, how can you walk away with the 2 to 3 really fun facts about the other person? And I think that takes vulnerability, by the way. Like, you have to kind of disclose, hey, I love reality TV. Like, I'm not ashamed to say it. Below deck yachting is potentially one of my favorite things out there. And I think when you have those moments and you're open and you bring a bit of humor and fun to people, like, naturally you're going to connect on that level. I think that's important. And then I also think, like, know your audience. Not everybody is going to appreciate that about me. And so do I want to, like, build a relationship in different way depending on people's personality style. And so I do think it's important to have, like, a bit of a level of self-awareness as you think about that. And then, yeah, I mean, look, we all want to feel like we belong as part of an organization. And I think helping feeling connected to others definitely builds that. So I would just say get involved, put yourself out there, get to know other people. It won't backfire.
Oh, lovely. Good advice. And let's bring it back then to the system before we close, Eimear, because again, I think there's people out there who are in decision-making roles in organizations who haven't put as much intention yet, right?
Yeah.
The yet is on there. Haven't put as much attention yet in building this infrastructure that you're building to really take care of your HubSpotters. So for those, what's a place of advice? Where could they start? What's one practice that they could start tomorrow?
Yeah. I would say make sure you understand, first of all, that you're solving for the right thing.
Yes.
We could have got feedback that people feel connected to others outside of their team, but not within their own team. And then what we would have done would have been completely different. So actually ask for feedback and then listen and act on that feedback. Let that be your guide around what you're solving for. And then make sure that really what you're doing is being driven from the top and has buy-in from the top. Like, we're really leaning into our leaders and ensuring that our leaders are there to create, like, purposeful gatherings. So we had our CEO, she was in Singapore recently, and again we held, like, very intentional gatherings there. And similarly, our CFO went to Seattle, where again we don't have an office, but we have a high proportion of our remote employees. Like, those things really matter, and it's also a really good opportunity for people to get that level of face time with the other senior leaders. So I think they're the 2 things that I would say, like, intentionally solve for the right thing, and then make sure that you have leadership buy-in and go from there.
Yeah. And, I've talked to Katie Burke about this because you're chief people officer.
Yeah.
HubSpot does such a good job around vulnerability, because vulnerability is a hard thing, and really putting yourself out there. If it's the word that is getting in your head and preventing you, I think, as I'm listening to you talking, Maria, this is about approaching another human as a human, right?
Yeah,
This
it
is
is.
about being human together and figuring
Yeah.
out a better way to do things. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it can be better.
Yeah, I love that. Like, humans like humans.
Yeah.
And you want to feel like that you have, like, I know some people say, no, don't have, your life and work should not revolve around your friend group. But, like, I want friends and work. That makes me feel truly connected to a company. And I think that's what really connects people to others outside of their team. And so I do think, like, bringing it down to that human level is really important. So yeah, I think you're bang on, and that's exactly it.
Yeah, I use a visualization sometimes with leaders. I'm like, visualize a giant hot air balloon. I've never been in one because I'm so afraid of heights. But if there's this giant basket that's weighted down, and then there's this giant balloon. The balloon is the employee, and we've got to tether them in the good way to the balloon so that they feel secure. Because if not, imagine them just floating off and drifting away with one snip, right? It's really.
It is. And, like, we know that, like, remote work can be lonely. Again, the data tells us that. Like, if you're there by yourself in your room, especially if you're having, say, tough conversations or a tough day, Like you're closing down your laptop and you're talking to yourself in your head. And I always say this, like no one should ever talk to themselves in your head. You're always going to tell yourself the worst thing. So you need to help people build their community and build their network. And it has to be more surface level. I think it really should be deeper. Like that's how you really drive retention and belonging in your organization.
Yeah. And then you do it in the way that is most applicable to you, in the style of you, which I think is
Definitely.
great.
That's exactly it.
Well, thanks, Eimear, for sharing so much about this Connect 4 program. It's my hope that people will hear this and that they will walk away with some tips and tricks that they can start tomorrow, either at that individual, that leader, or even the system level is our hope. So thanks for helping us rework work.
Of course, happy to.
All right, everybody, peace and progress.